Okay, you seeing my screen okay, Mag? Excellent. So just give me a when.
I think that we should just get started, and then when people come in, they come in, and we'll
Sure,
catch them up.
sure. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with the Vermont Science Teachers Association again. Maggie, thank you very much to you and the board for this invitation. This is a kind of a redux from the presentation that we did back in June, and specifically, a lot of you folks were able to get involved in the book study for this book, Crosscutting Concept, Strengthening Science and Engineering Learning, which is, a pretty hefty book. Here's the good news. We're not going to go through the whole thing today. We're scheduled for 4 o'clock until 6, but I don't think that we'll be going right until 6 today, respecting people's time and understanding that teachers are already putting in a long day without having to extend it any longer, because I know you have things to do after this work. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter McLaren. I am in the beautiful state of Rhode Island. Right now, the sun is setting behind me now, getting lower, I should say, not setting yet. But just to give you a little background, I spent 13 years in the classroom as middle school and high school science department chair in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. I was also the science and technology specialist for the Department of Ed for 10 years. And then I worked for Achieve for some time as a director of state and district support for science. But what I really identify with more than anything else is I'm a teacher. I always will be a teacher. And when I'm presenting, or whether I'm bringing out something that's coming from policy and trying to put it into something that is going to be meaningful for educators, I call myself a standards whisperer, someone who can take that bureaucratic language and try to bring it into something that practitioners can use. During my tenure as the science and technology specialist, Rhode Island, I had the great pleasure of being part of the Next Generation Science Standards Committee, writing these standards. If anybody has any complaints about middle school physical science, you guys can speak to me, because that was really my area of expertise. But today, I'm going to talk about a dimension that I think is probably the most important, not trying to be biased here, but most important, but least understood by educators. And I say that not just about educators. When we were writing these standards and we were started to bring those out in 2013, we were really confident about the core ideas, confident about the practices. We were still trying to figure out the cross-cutting concepts. Well, the good news is since that time, we've really had a chance to really work cross-cutting concepts and show how they really do work towards supporting students' understanding of aspects of the phenomena. And so what we're going to be doing over the next, I guess, hour and a half or so, we're going to be digging into this. Now, normally what I do is do breakout rooms, but since we have right now 5 participants, we'll just be doing it right all together. So that way you can't escape into the cloak of a breakout room. I'll be here, probably be part of the discussion. But more importantly, it's great for you to be able to kind of flex your brain a little bit, put out some ideas, be able to try some thoughts out and see how they work with some of the breakout sessions we're going to be doing with that. So with that, I think everybody that's on already has a link to the PowerPoint, but it's if you don't, just give a yell. I can put it back in the chat box if you join in late. So let's get moving on. So here's the norms. Again, this is really designed for larger groups, but more importantly, this is where we're just trying to be respectful. Try to keep. I've already closed my door because I have a very loquacious 2 cats, and if I don't close the door, they will be jumping up and probably waving at you and meowing because it's close to dinner time for them. But we want to be able to try and have those breakout groups. Here's the thing that's really important. have a notebook, something that comes along that really hits your brain that you really like, write it down, make a note, something that might be reinforced. Because what I really hope is that tomorrow, as a result of this session, tomorrow, I think you're going to be strong enough to be able to try this out in your classroom. And it doesn't make any difference if you don't have a three-dimensional lesson or if you're not three-dimensional in your instruction yet. Cross-cutting concepts you can use with traditional teaching very, very simply. And I hope that's going to be something that you have that confidence for. If you do have a question, raise your hand, use the raise hand function or on Zoom. I will be sharing things. I'll be breaking in and out of full presentation mode into slideshow mode so I can put in links into the chat box, but that will be our lifeblood for that. And in fact, I'm going to open up the chat box now, just slide it over to the side so I can see if anybody posts. So the first thing I'm going to do is I really love to hear from you, any aha moments you had from the Crosscutting Concepts book study or your experience with Crosscutting Concepts. Then we're going to talk about how these three dimensions work together. Remember that the NGSS, it's all about integrating these three dimensions, not just saying, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, but how do they reach together at that nexus? And it is at that nexus, the sweet spot, as I like to call it, is where student learning really, really gets amplified, especially in science. The other piece we're going to be doing is we're going to be working as one big group on cross-cutting concepts and how to focus on explanation of the phenomena. And more importantly, again, this is what I was talking about, for something you can do tomorrow. How to use cross-cutting concepts to structure student thinking. But first, this is what I want to hear from you. And please do not be shy. Don't make me call on people, but I really love to hear if you have any aha moments from the Crosscutting Concepts book study, or if you have any ideas or comments or fears or concerns or celebrations about cross-cutting concepts. I would really welcome to hear your voices and hear what you have to say about this. So the floor is yours. Please share.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I haven't read the book. Was I supposed to read the book for this?
No, Jennifer, you're fine. It's just when we did it in June, it was as a result of the book study. But that being said, Jennifer, I mean, your experience with cross-cutting concepts is fine. What are your thoughts?
So I've been in science education for a long time. I'm no longer in the classroom, so I'll just put that out there. But I do remember that it was the AAAS that had out the benchmarks for science literacy. And part of what I loved about that was that they had, I think they called it the unifying themes at that time.
Yeah.
And so when NGSS came out and I saw the cross-cutting concepts, I really felt like it was a piece of the puzzle that hadn't been attended to at all.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Jennifer. As you may remember, when I was at the Department of Ed in Rhode Island, we also shared an assessment with Vermont and New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And the standards that we had, I know that they weren't the same as Vermont, they weren't the same as New Hampshire, but we all used what you called unifying themes. And they were very similar to what you see up there, the structure and function and cause and effect and what have you.
Yes.
The difference was, though, they really weren't assessed. And if they aren't assessed, they probably weren't used in the classroom very much. I know as a practicing teacher, I know that I wasn't using those, even though they were in the benchmarks, because I really didn't understand them. And they were nice to know, but how do you use them? That was a question. But thank you for bringing that up. In fact, I did a presentation earlier this morning with the Minnesota group, and I brought up the unifying themes, and they all recalled those unifying themes. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to share an aha moment or perspective or fear or concern or what you hope to learn?
I always found that when I was in the classroom setting, that the cross-cutting concepts were not only interdisciplinary within the science content, but when we're talking about cause and effect and like system and system changes, it was also really interesting to see them in other contents as well. So the cause and effect of what happens in like civics and social studies, like it wasn't just a unifying theme in all of, science content, but it was wonderful because all of a sudden my students would be like, oh, cause and effect, like we learn about this in humanities, and you're like, yes you do. Like it, you it's a I think it's a really great opportunity to integrate not only science contents within the science domain, but also it could be a bridge to connect, science and social studies, really look at like when we're talking about stability and change with science and math and engineer, like ways to really bring other contents into it.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. That's what you're bringing up is so true. And I have to tell you that I've done this presentation several times in several different areas, but it is when I do it in front of elementary teachers, they chime in right away. They say, I can use these when I'm teaching mathematics. I can use these when I'm teaching reading. Because when we're talking about cause and effect, as you mentioned, you're looking at what is the cause of something happening in reading, or when you're looking at patterns, for instance, especially in mathematics, that crosses over too. So great point. Thank you. So I appreciate everyone sharing in, and please do not be formal. Just chime in, and we'll have a conversation as we go through. It's going to be nice and informal today. So WDTFS, you all seen these cause bracelets around? I've got mine on. WDTFS, it says you probably can't see it from the screen. But anyways, what WDTFS means is, what does the framework say? And the framework, which I have my nicely dog-eared copy right here. If you don't have it, please pick it up. It is easy to get. If you go to nap.edu, you have the PowerPoint, so you can grab the URL right off the bottom of that. The framework is, I call that an argument settler. For instance, I've had so many people come up with different questions. And one of the major things, as I told you, I was middle school physical science, the NGSS. Why don't we teach about protons and neutrons and electrons at middle school? I used to do that all the time. I used to have them make models and all that stuff. Well, it's not in the standards at the middle school level. It's in the standards for the high school level. So instead of getting ruffled about it, I just direct people to say, look in the framework. It's reason why the framework says the abstraction of the very, very small and the very, very large is the reason why it transcends middle school to high school. That's just one little factoid that really helps you with the understanding of why the NGSS are written the way they were, because of the fact that this is a compendium not only of the benchmarks of science literacy and the national science education standards that they brought over, but a compendium of the research that went on from 1996 until 2010, when the framework was really started drafting. That's a lot of research that was missing that is in that framework. Great document to have. And if you download it as a PDF, use that search function. It makes it so much easier to find things rather than trying to flip through the pages. So I actually like my PDF version a little bit better. So, Vermont was right behind Rhode Island when adopting the standards. So you folks came on in 2013, the same as Rhode Island did. But so this seems like it's going to be like, how will science education change? Well, I like to think that Vermont might be a little bit more ahead of Rhode Island because we still have people that's still trying to figure it out, how these standards, how to use these standards in the classroom. And using this slide, for instance, on the left-hand slide, you see, this is basically how I was taught as a pre-service teacher. You know, you're going to be basically regurgitating information. You want students to write it down in notebooks, and not that I was that strict that way, but if you look on the right hand side, it shows how it is much more student focused. You know, you're looking at how students will be writing, students will be discussing, students will be reading. And for this presentation, we're really going to be looking at how you can use phenomenon to leverage engagement and to grab a hold of the student's curiosity and use that as a motivator for learning. And also, not just about memorizing facts or filling out a multiple choice type of thing to be able to show what you know. It's more about how students will respond to open-ended questions. How are they going to be able to use evidence to support their claims that they have uncovered as a result of their investigations? And so when we look at the Holy Trinity, as my sainted grandmother would say, you know, Mary C. McLaren would talk in the Irish Brogue and talk about the Holy Trinity all the time, and you have the three wonderful mysteries and what have you. Well, I hate to break it to my grandmother. I know she's listening to me, but this is not a mystery. These are three separate dimensions that integrate in the middle. And as science teachers, I found that everybody is most familiar with this. This is how we were trained. We went to college to learn all this stuff. We really had that under our belt. The only thing that might be new for us is here, the waves and applications for technology and information transfer and engineering and technology. I know that really wasn't in our former standards. And certainly since 1995, waves in technology, that's 1995 is when computers started becoming prevalent in the classroom. Now, every single student, there's no more digital migrants anymore. They're all digital natives. This is how we live. And so when the standards were written and the framework was written, the idea was they should really know how this works. Similar to if you bought a gasoline powered engine back in the 60s or the 70s, you should really know how it works under the hood. Well, same situation. If you have a phone, how does it work? If you have a computer, how does it work? So that's the only thing that's really new, but the comfort level, not a lot of stress there. Even when you go over to practices, we knew them as inquiry, at least when I was trained in 1993, 1992, it was inquiry. I mean, my cooperating teachers say, you need more inquiry in that lesson, McLaren. I said, but what does that mean? What do you mean by inquiry? The framework broke out inquiry into 8 distinct practices that scientists and engineers use. So even that, once they're defined, science teachers really get that. No problem. Down here, cross-cutting concepts, now we're getting a little bit different. So now we're digging into, as Jennifer is mentioning, they've always been mentioned, even going back to 1993 when the benchmarks came out. We never really used them. But those 7 cross-cutting concepts transcend all of these domains: life science, physical science, earth science, and engineering technology. In other words, patterns, you see patterns in life, you see patterns in physical science and earth science. It doesn't make any difference. They cross all of those. So when we talk about that, I want you to just let's go back to that first one. Notice how these are all and it looks like it's a hierarchy. And that's a misconception that I want to be able to break that paradigm. It doesn't mean you have to start with asking questions and ending up with obtaining, evaluating, and communicating. They are more like, oh gosh, almost like when they draw the Powerball and they have the ball, the ping pong balls popping up, they could be used anywhere. And so this next slide gives you an idea of how you can use an instructional sequence. In this case, I'm using the gather, reason, and communicating sequence, but this could also be the 5E model from Roger Bybee. But think about a lesson. Your lesson has a beginning where the students are gathering information, getting to know what they're going to be digging into, and then they get into the body of the lesson where they're really reasoning with it. And then towards the end, they're going to show you what they know. They're going to communicate what they understand. So those three phases, so to speak, I want you to notice over on the right-hand side. Notice that obtain, evaluate, and communicate information. It's written as one practice when I go back to the practices, obtaining, evaluating, communicating. It's really depending on what purpose you're using. You obtain information at the beginning of the lesson. You're going to evaluate that information when you're reasoning with it, and then you're going to communicate it when you're ready to show what you know, so to speak. And by the way, for all those folks, especially for elementary teachers, this is a very literacy-based practice. What we're talking about here is going and looking this up on the internet, finding different media, finding books, finding videos, information that's already out there to use to be able to find evidence to explain the phenomenon. But wait, there's more. If we look up here in the gather section, notice that there are some practices here and here that are black. They're coded black. They're coded black because they are singularities. In other words, when you're gathering information, that's when you're probably going to be using asking questions more than any other time. I mean, they'll ask questions throughout, but when you're really focusing on asking questions, it's at the beginning of a lesson or when they finish a lesson and it leads to more questions that will start the next lesson. Same with planning and carrying out investigations. You're trying to gather data. Once you have some information, you may want to be able to test it. Once you have the questions out there, how do you test the questions? But the last thing I want to bring out to you is notice how models is also in all three areas. If you think about models, students use models all the time, whether they realize it or not, whether it's a mental model or whether it's a physical model that they actually put together, or whether it's a drawn model. They'll use models to get out their initial understanding, henceforth in gathering. But as they get more information and as they start evaluating that information or analyzing it, they're going to revise those models. So a model is not static. A model can change based upon new information coming in. And lastly, when you are ready to present your understanding, a model is a great way of doing that. Think of poster sessions that you see often at colleges and universities. That's a great use of a model that's going to express what you know. So what I want you to take away with this slide is that the practices are not they're not hierarchical. They have different purposes depending on where they are in the lesson, and they could be used over again. So just because you use a model once doesn't mean you can't do it again. I love this Venn diagram, and I never get sick of putting this out there, even though a lot of states are not using Common Core, so to speak, and a lot of these are coming from the Common Core. It's more about how science and math and literacy intersect. And if you look over here, you can see how science and literacy connect. You have the practices of science and the competencies of literacy and where they come into play. And look, there's that obtain, evaluate, and communicate information practice right there at that nexus for literacy. And mathematics, science and math both use models, and how they use the mathematics and computational thinking for science. There's that nexus. But in the center here, it's all about that word that begins with E and ends with E and has vidence in between it. It's all about evidence. And so literacy, mathematics, science, it's all about building an explanation, but only upon evidence, not about opinion, not about what they see on Twitter, not about what they see on the internet. What's the evidence behind it? Those of you that, I mean, you don't have, unless you're really living underneath a rock, the discussions that are going on, especially in social media now, about life changing, life saving strategies that are out there that are being debunked by somebody said they saw it on Twitter, they need to understand about evidence and where the evidence comes from. That's what we're trying to do for our students now. But here they are, a beautiful thing they are, cross-cutting concepts. And I trust on your PowerPoint, you can pull this out. This is your own pull out of cross-cutting concept that you used around throughout the session. But the 7 cross-cutting concepts, you know, patterns, cause and effect, scale and plot, I'm not going to read them to you. These are I guess this is, if you really think about this, core ideas. If I were to do an elevator speech about the 3 dimensions, I would say the core ideas is what students are going to know. Practices are what the students are going to do. Cross-cutting concepts is how they're going to structure their thinking. So all 3 work together to be able to come away with a strong understanding of science concepts. So this is what we're going to be doing in a minute or so. And I stored this in a New England, Northeast Minnesota PD file, but you can use this worksheet. And if I can click, you should be able to get it off of your PowerPoint. This is probably not going to work out very well, but
I dropped the link in the chat.
thank you. But this is more of a guide more than anything else. You can click on any one of these guides. If I can open this up. So for instance, what you're going to be doing here is I'm going to show you a couple of videos. And you notice that we have breakout 1, breakout 2, and then we go down breakout 3. What you're going to be doing with this is, for the first breakout, I'm going to show you a video of a young lady that is dismounting from a trapeze, falling on a safety net, but it's about, not about the falling on the safety net, it's all about how the leaves behave. We're looking at the leaves as a phenomena here. And what I would like you to do, and I'm going to ask all of you to do this, is to physically write an explanation of what's happening with these leaves. And when I say physically write it, I want to be able to have it, want you to physically write it. That way, we can all share that out. So going back to the PowerPoint, there we are. The video that I'm going to show you is this one here. Can you all see the screen coming up to YouTube now? Good, okay.
This is the
And there's my house
and
there.
Granddad
If anybody
will
wants to rent that house for VRBO, let me know.
This is the kitchen
No,
where the new
forget it.
boyfriend will unofficially be.
All right, here we go. Observe the leaves. Gosh, that looks like fun.
I mean, I think you have a very interesting idea of fun. That definitely looks interesting.
Let me play that one more time. What are you saying with the leaves, and can you explain why the leaves are behaving? I know that sounds kind of anthropogenic, but how the leaves are reacting.
Okay, now, Peter, did you want us to write this somewhere? Or am I
Sure.
writing on my notes in front of me?
And write on the notes, you can write in that worksheet that's in the PowerPoint, wherever you want to write it, but write an explanation of what you see there. And again, this is a judgment-free zone. It's like going to Planet Fitness. There's no right or wrong answers. Just write an explanation of what you're seeing. Let me play this one more time for all of you. All right, there you go. So let me give you a few minutes and write out an explanation, and then I'm going to be calling on you to be able to share your explanation. And again, don't worry about, doesn't have to be scientifically perfect. Don't have to go into the internet and Google an answer. Just give me an explanation how the leaves were behaving, in air quotes, on that trampoline. Does anyone need more time? All right, Erica, would you mind sharing what you wrote for your explanation?
Yes. So I wrote, the leaves did not fall at the same rate as the person or the trampoline. The person had time to accelerate and the trampoline experienced force, which caused it to go lower. Whereas the leaves were all, well, they look like they're a unit, they're all individuals. And so they took some additional time to go downward and start falling.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Erica. Jessica, do you want to share your explanation?
Sure. I said that the leaves remained at rest until they were acted on by an outside force, which was gravity, or the trampoline coming back and hitting them. But of course, like some of the leaves probably got caught in the net too, so they were pulled down. But it looked like they just were like suspended in the air for a while. And
Yeah.
that was really cool.
Yeah, that's the great thing about this video. It captured it in slow motion because a lot of times you don't really see that in real time.
Yeah.
So appreciate. By the way, Jessica, what grade level do you teach, or what course do you teach?
Well, I was a middle school science teacher for years and math, but now I'm a STEM integrationist instructional coach up in the Northeast Kingdom.
And Erica, what about yourself? What do you teach?
So I'm not a teacher. I taught last year, but I'm an AmeriCorps Vista for VEEP, which is Vermont Energy Education Program, which develops curriculum and kits for classrooms.
Oh, this is great for you. This is a wonderful thing to include in that program. So thank you. And Jennifer, when you were teaching, what was it that where was your expertise?
I was high school chemistry.
Oh, excellent. Okay, great. And Jennifer, while I have you on the screen, what was your explanation?
Well, pieces of what both Erica and Jessica said. So before the person hits the net, you're in that balanced forces state. So the leaves and the net are just pushing equally on each other. And then the person hits the net and the force is applied to the net and whatever leaves are directly underneath her. So that's where those like leaves are suspended for a moment until the force of gravity does the pull. And then it's the sort of back and forth of the push, pull between the sort of, boy, I don't even know how to say that because it's gravity on the person as well, right? But that push pull between the elasticity of the net and the gravity kind of thing kicking in.
Excellent, excellent point. So it's almost like simple harmonic motion when you're seeing that. Like you can analogize it to a weight on the end of a spring and letting it go.
Yeah.
But all three of you brought out some great explanations. But in the interest of cross-cutting concepts, and I appreciate what you just shared, think about how your explanation would be if I asked you to use cross-cutting concepts in your explanation. There's a method to my madness here. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is take the explanation that you just shared, all three of you, and this time revise it to include at least one cross-cutting concept. You should have that sheet that explains all the cross-cutting concepts. You can look at that and see what it is that you'd like to infuse into that. But what I would like you to do is, you probably only need 2 minutes, just revise the explanation so that your explanation has at least one cross-cutting concept in it. Sounds simple, right? It's very easy to think about. So if you don't have any questions, I'll let you guys get busy with that.
It seems so unfair that we have to use at least one, so we can use more.
Oh, you can use at least one. You can use two. If you're really clever, you can use 7 if you want. Then I'd really have a discussion with you. This is why it's important to write it down so that it's not coming off the top of your head. It's coming similar to what you would expect a student to do. I did a presentation this morning for a district in Minnesota for K-5 and really focus on the importance of literacy for science at that K-5 level. Not that it's not important 6-12, but how to use literacy for science to be able to use validate evidence. And really talking about reading and writing and discourse. We had some great discussions around that. All right, Maggie, since you're the host and we didn't get a chance to hear your explanation, but do you want to share your revised explanation?
I'm trying to write it as we speak. I first
Oh,
started
okay.
saying,
You want some more time?
no, I'll wing it. I can wing it. So I first started off by saying the energy of the trapeze artist transferred to the net, but not the leaves as a whole, because the leaf system is comprised of small different components and they're not connected. And then what I was gonna do was, because that's where I stopped before I got called on. But then I was gonna go into explaining a little bit more about how that energy transfer caused a cause and effect chain to occur based on the structure of the net. I was going for 7 cross-cutting concepts. I didn't quite get there, but what was coming out when I was trying to do this was it was so difficult just to talk about the nuance of one, because there were so many different things that were happening, and it was like, because everything connected, like it had to do with the elasticity, it had to do with the energy transfer, so I'm gonna mute myself.
No, that's great. So I heard you using energy transfer, and then you segued into cause and effect. That's fine. Jennifer, do you want to share your revised?
Well, I will say, Maggie, I kind of started off trying to make all those connections because there's a lot of them here.
Yeah.
But then to me, the most maybe direct connection was to cause effect. And I think structure and function is closely tied to cause effect. So those were my two. And basically, I guess I'm saying that the force of the push of the dropping person on the net causes the net to flex, and the force of gravity is causing the leaves to drop. So I wanted to get that like cause and effect. And then I tried to redo it with structure function, because they're so similar. So something about the elasticity of the net, the structure, allows it to, I use the word bounce because I couldn't come up with something else, allows it to bounce or maybe stretch and contract, right? So it's that structure function thing I was going for.
Perfect. I'm going to ask you, remember those two cross-cutting concepts that you shared in a few slides. I'm going to call upon you again. That was a perfect, that'll be a perfect segue in probably about 5 minutes or so. But thank you, Jennifer. Erica, you want to share yours?
Yeah, I mostly focused on cause and effect because I thought it was the
Okay.
most clearest thing I noticed. So I just wrote, when the person falls, they accelerate and use force to bring down the trampoline. This causes the trampoline to fall quickly and allows gravity to start working on the leaves.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Great revision on that. And last but not least, Jessica.
Okay, so I had to go back to the initial question, which was focusing on the behavior of the leaves. And I said to myself, well, the leaves wouldn't have behaved the way that they did if the person landed on concrete. So I went straight to structure function of the trampoline.
I really like that. I mean, what I really like about that, Jessica, is that it's almost like an engineering, you're almost thinking like an engineer. You're looking at the materials.
Yeah,
And the materials are what it's important about that. And you focused on structure and function. And so you're kind of going along with what Jennifer was saying.
yeah,
But all of your revised explanations are perfectly valid.
right.
If you're thinking that somebody's I'm gonna say, oh, anybody that said cause and effect, you're absolutely right. I'm not gonna do that because you're all making valid explanations using cross-cutting concepts. Let me show you why this is important that we did this exercise. So we all use the cross-cutting concepts. And by the way, this is a NGSS standard that it's actually an 8th grade standard or middle school standard that we're doing it. But the inclusion of the cross-cutting concept, how did that help you with the explanation? Well, as a teacher, if you had an explanation using these cross-cutting concepts from students, it's going to reveal more of an understanding of what that student knows about that concept. Okay, I think you all agree with that. But here's the real aha moment why I put this in this presentation. Because I've done this type of workshop with 50 or 60 people, and I've done it, with a small group like we have right now. When I ask people to include in a cross-cutting concept, they recall when they first saw the video. And when they saw the video, they weren't discussing it, weren't doing it in group, but as they did watching the video in their mind, they looked at an aspect of the phenomenon. And by looking at that aspect of the phenomenon, they focused on that aspect. In other words, what I'm saying to you is that many of you saw cause. There's something that's causing something. The fall of the trapeze artist on the leaves and the net causes the leaves to either rebound up or go down. Two of you talked about structure and function. The fact that the net is what would really cause, because of the structure and how it functions, it causes the rebounding. And Maggie, I love it when you talk about energy transfer, because there's energy involved. You're transferring energy from the person's body, impacting onto the leaves, onto the net. The energy is coming back and it's slowly going to equilibrium after the energy is transferred. All of you use valid uses of the cross-cutting concepts, but it is because in your mind, you focus on an aspect. This is a really important point and shows the power of cross-cutting concepts. As teachers, when you're teaching when you're exposing students to a phenomena, for instance, you don't just put a phenomenon in front of people and say, okay, go for it. Let's go. Here it is. Here's a phenomenon. So what are you going to do with it? Normally, what you're going to do is give them some kind of structure, a prompt, or direction. If you think about what you just did, if you are teaching this and you want them to understand about cause and effect of the cause of the gravity or the cause of the air resistance, or if you're talking about structure and function, if you're looking at how the elasticity of the net provides the harmonics to be able to bounce it back and forth, you as the teacher choose the aspect you want the students to focus on. And as you do that, you direct your prompts and your questions so that they reflect that aspect. When you ask students to observe this, and notice I didn't do that, I would say, if I were to go back, I would say, when you're observing this video, what would cause the way in which that the leaves behave? Or I would say, how does the structure of the net function to affect the leaves? The students then, if they're looking at it with that kind of a prompt, Now you're going to have students, instead of being all over the place, really focusing on the phenomena. You prove that point because we as human beings, naturally, when we are exposed to phenomena, whether it's a rainbow or whether you're looking at the symmetry of a purple coneflower, or whether you're just looking at how the snow is reflecting light or whatever the phenomena is, your mind is reacting in such a way that it's going to try to figure out why that's happening, or why did those patterns come into play. And that's the power of the cross-cutting concept. So as we go forward with that, let's keep that in mind. Jennifer, this is where you come in. We're going to reorganize the cross-cutting concepts, and this is how we know them. Here they are, 7 of them. Now, poor teachers, they've got 8 practices, they got 7 cross-cutting concepts, they have God knows how many different performance expectations. It's a permutation, it's all over the place. And so my colleague Brett Molding does a lot of work with teachers in Utah using a grant that he had in Utah. And these teachers said, Brett, you know what, it doesn't make sense to have 7 of these. Can we reorganize them? Let's see how they work together. Jennifer, you're spot on. 3 buckets: causality, systems, and patterns. And Jennifer, look on causality. What are the 2 cross-cutting concepts under causality?
Yeah, cause, effect, and structure function.
What we're talking about. The reason why something functions is caused by its structure, and vice versa, and obviously cause and effect. But I want you to focus on systems. Yes, you have a cross-cutting concept, a system, and believe me, and this is, Erica, when you're talking about putting out materials for students to understand more about energy, have them define the system so they know what the system is that you're talking about. You're not talking about the whole world. You're not talking about necessary state. You may be talking about a very, very small subset of a system. And so when you do that, you help the students focus in on a specific aspect of the phenomenon, rather than, this morning I had teachers on a Zoom call going out and collecting grass and root systems and coming back and looking at the function of roots and grasses. But when I talked about systems with them, if I was asking them to define the system, they wouldn't be including the trees that are near the grass, or they wouldn't be including the sun that's above it. You want to be able to define the system so that it is really succinct to the phenomenon being studied. But within that system, now you have energy being transferred in and transferred out, matter being cycled in and cycled out of that system. Is the system stable, or is the system dynamic? Is the system, how big is the system? Does it have is it one system larger than another? What's the proportion of it? For instance, if you're looking at the Andromeda galaxy versus the solar system, how do those compare? And lastly, quantity, how much stuff is in the system? But the third bucket, patterns, all by itself. And patterns are all by itself because they are an incredibly powerful cross-cutting concept. If you have children as young as 1 or 2, I'd be willing to bet that you can probably provide some evidence that your children react to patterns. They see patterns, they'll react to them, they'll work with them. I still remember those line mazes. May not get that to 1 or 2 year olds, but you get that into 6 or 7 year olds where they draw a line to see if it gets to the center, like a corn maze. They're looking at patterns to see how they can work that out. So patterns are strong motivators in terms of explanation, and they really help sense making. And so when we look at these, if you look at causality and patterns and systems, notice the dynamic arrows there. So if you see a particular pattern, you may want to know about what caused it, and how was that pattern caused, and maybe you're going to find the system define the system for that cause, and how big is it, what have you. Put a phenomenon in the center that's being focused upon. Look at what happens here. You may have may start out by determining with the phenomenon what caused the phenomenon and how did that work, or what's the structure of the phenomenon and maybe the function of that. And then it may lead into, once you have that, let's talk about the system that you're really studying and how that might affect the whole understanding of the phenomenon. And lastly, the pattern. Use patterns as evidence. And again, those dynamic arrows, they can go any way around. It doesn't mean this is the only way it happens. It's very dynamic. So when students are engaged in a cross-cutting concept, it focuses in on the aspect of the phenomenon that really is important. And you as teachers can help decide what aspect is being focused upon, because you know where you want them to go in your lesson or their investigation. So this is where we kind of put it all together here. So how do you use these in the classroom? So I'm going to play this video for you. And then what I'm going to ask you to do, and I'm going to advance over, this is your ask. You're going to be a teacher, and you're going to use this video as a phenomenon for a lesson. So not in your groups, but in our little group, brainstorm one prompt. In other words, if you're going to introduce this phenomenon to teachers, to students, write down what that prompt would be to help them look at an aspect of this imploding tanker car that you want them to learn about. Okay. And then we'll just do one prompt for now. Maybe we'll do another one if we have some more time. But it's in the worksheet, and thank you for putting that in there, Maggie. The instructions are in the worksheet under breakout 3. But I'm going to play this video. If you are all fans of Mythbusters, Mythbusters actually did this investigation. They tried to do what I'm going to show you, and they couldn't do it. So therefore, now they're saying this is a myth. That being said, it's still a cool thing to watch. So here we go. Let me do that again. Oops, it's going into the YouTube. Sorry. And now we'll get the ads.
99% of people are living in a delusion. America is in crisis.
Yeah, I know.
760. Gewonnen haben wir Jakob der Hinch.
Maybe play it one more time.
760. Gewonnen haben wir Jakob der Hinch.
All right, let's go back to our PowerPoint. So, without cheating and advancing into the PowerPoint that you have in front of you, what would you write? How would you introduce this? What prompt would you use to introduce this phenomenon to your students? In your mind's eye, you probably have a lesson in mind. What would that prompt be to get them to focus on that? So give yourself a couple of minutes, maybe 3, and then we'll come back and we'll take a look at our prompts, and we'll talk about those. I see some of you still writing. I really like the fact that this is a very small group. I really, really like this part. Okay, anybody want to share their prompts? How would you get your students to focus on this video? Take a volunteer. Jessica, you want to try it?
Yeah, sure. I was actually a part of this initial rollout with VSI with Renee Offetler years ago when she used this as a phenomena in the course I was taking. So it's bringing back really great memories. And I actually used it in my classroom years ago prior to the whole Mythbuster thing happening. So when we were looking at air puppies and air pressure. So I don't know. I feel like I could go in lots of different directions here. And I always like to work with like the literacy teachers at my school to help me craft a good question. So this is like just totally off the top of my head, because I would probably ponder this question for a while, as I always did with my phenomena questions. I don't know, like simple would be, I don't know, what caused the oil tanker to implode? What aspects of the oil tanker system caused it to implode? What factors caused the oil tanker to transition from a stable system to an unstable system? I don't know. I guess it depends on what cross-cutting concept you really want to focus on, and how would you lead them to wanting to look at maybe even energy. I don't know.
Excellent.
Okay, thanks.
No, great, Jessica, and I appreciate that. And by the way, when you were muted and you're going like this, it reminded me, I was years ago, I had the opportunity to go to a cattle auction in Middleton, Ireland. And before I walked in there, my host, the guy named Mick Walsh, when he brought me in there, here I was, this young American kid. He said, "For God's sakes, whatever you do, don't move your hands or twitch your nose. You'd be buying a steer." And that's exactly what he's saying. If you do that, you're bidding. So, but thank you for doing that. That way, I kind of drew on you to do the first response, and I appreciate that. What caused it? What aspect caused it? What caused it from going from stable to unstable? Excellent points. Jennifer, you want to follow up?
Well, there's only 3 of us and I can't get the name straight. Jessica, right? Jessica was just talking. Jessica, I too am very familiar with this phenomena and with Renee. So again, I'm just so zoomed in on cause effect, I can't help it. And when you were playing the video, Peter, I wanted to ask and then just decided I wasn't gonna ask because the audio on my end was like non-existent. And so
Ah.
I was wondering if the audio was saying about the guys going in and cleaning out the tanker, because there's some steam cleaning of the tanker. Anyway, assuming that wasn't audible to anyone, then my question goes at cause effect, and it's something like, tanker cars don't typically implode like this, so what happened to cause this implosion? Or what conditions were present that caused this to implode, or something like that?
Well, I think that's excellent. And by the way, if you had your audio up, they were talking, but they were talking in German. So
Oh.
unless you knew German, you probably wouldn't understand what they were saying.
There you go.
So perfect. And Erica, how about you? What did you say? Thank you for sharing that, Jennifer.
I didn't say anything. I didn't quite know. I guess like I had like kind of just like a basic of like, what did you notice? Like, what do you think happened? Because I have no clue what happened there. I am not familiar with the whole situation, with why people think the tanker imploded like that. So yeah.
So going back to what Jessica and Jennifer shared, did their prompts make sense to you? So that kind of gives you an example of what we were talking about. So in your role, when you're creating curriculum and resources, what have you, you may be introducing, you may be having some phenomena or some things that you're going to be introducing in your materials. And so there may be a way to use these cross-cutting concepts to help them focus on what the purpose of the material is. So if you have a different phenomenon. But Jessica and Jennifer brought up some good examples. But Erica, you're going to see in a minute that there are a lot of people that had the same problem as far as didn't really know what they would do with this. And Maggie, not to leave you out, do you want to share yours?
I started using the stability and change specifically about, and I kind of just was very broad, and I couldn't help but going to like, how would I kind of incorporate this into a larger lesson? So how would the design, because that was a very human designed system, and taking that knowledge and then applying it to the natural system. So what do we see? So, I went for that stability and change specifically about the effect of instability in the atmosphere. Like my brain just went that way. So don't really have a question, but I was thinking about it. That's
Well, it sounds to me that you and Jennifer are very, very parallel. What would cause something that's stable to go unstable very quickly? And yet I really should try to download the Mythbusters episode, because I remember watching it with my significant other, and I said, oh, I do this phenomenon all the time. And I was so disappointed when they couldn't get the tanker to implode. I mean,
and for them to say that the myth was busted, I mean, you can recreate this at a variety of different scales.
Absolutely.
I've done it with just an aluminum can.
Exactly.
And right, but like, you can make it can happen, but it has to be when going back to what Erica had said. When you're thinking about your system, like the parameters in which you include in that system and that designed aspect, it becomes critical.
And that might be, talk about a great lesson. This might be a great way of bringing it out, and then bringing out the Mythbusters. Why is it the Mythbusters couldn't get it to do, but this did happen? So there could be some comparisons to that, looking at two different systems. Well, I want you to recall what we did earlier, where I had you write an explanation. Then I asked you to include in a cross-cutting concept in your explanation. So, in fact, I have here, when I was preparing for this, all these little Post-it notes. These are these are what people have written. I remember doing this when we're up in Vermont. I want to say the Vermont,
January 16th.
well, no, not January. This is when we at that resort in November, I think.
October 24th,
Yes.
2019. Not
Margaret,
that I know those dates offhand. It's just
you
like,
you are a rain person. That's all I can say. You're a rain person. But these are all actual prompts that people, what I would do is actually have them go around and paste them up. But I grabbed a few of these and they're in your PowerPoint, but I want you to see the different prompts that came up. And Erica, this is what I was putting forward to you, that there are a number of people that just say, okay, think about the cross-cutting concept you want to focus on and write a prompt. So for instance, the prompt here, cause and effect, what events preceded the collapse? Okay, I can see how that relates to cause and effect. And then system and system models. What are the different components of the system? Makes sense. Energy and matter. What forces were acting on the tanker? So these, if we're apprenticing writing prompts, these are not bad initial prompts. But as I mentioned before to you, I mean, I've gone a kind of a interesting journey in education, but I always come back to my teacher side. And I ask myself, would these prompts help students focus? I mean, I told the group this morning that I remember, Sunday night, finishing up a lesson that I was going to use on Monday that I thought was going to be in the Journal of Science Teaching. I thought it was the greatest lesson on God's green earth. I was so proud of myself. I went in the next day, put it out there, and kids were just dumbfounded. They were walking into each other. They couldn't understand what to do. And I'm running around trying to ask questions like, what do you observe? And, what did you see? And they still got more confused. And then I thought about this. And the reason why I thought about this is if I took away those cross-cutting concepts, would the students really know what aspect of the phenomenon I want them to focus on? Some of them, I think you'd argue that you probably could, but like, for instance, if I asked them to what events preceded the collapse, they may draw upon history and say, well, maybe it was the bad iron that came from Germany or something to that effect, or outside forces acting on the tanker. They may not be making a connection to cause and effect. I mean, open and closed system, yeah, they might be able to relate to a system here, but I want you to see, actually, I don't want you to see it. I want you to feel it. I want you to feel what it's like to be a student and show that video. And these might be some of the prompts. Would you be able to focus on the aspect? And I have to tell you, in my experience as a teacher, as I gained more understanding of teaching and learning, when I first started teaching, I was thinking, oh, they just don't get it. The poor kids don't get it. And I got to remediate. It's not because they don't get it. It's because of the fact I wasn't giving them the right scaffold. I wasn't prompting them or questioning them in the proper way. So what I did with this example here is I asked the teachers to take a minute and revise their prompts. Now, if we were doing this face-to-face, we had more time, and this is exactly what I did for the face-to-face VSTA. I asked them to revise their prompts and then put them up on the poster board. So this is what it looks like when they're revised. There is nothing wrong with being absolutely transparent with what you want them to look at. It's not cheating. A matter of fact, I do not advocate, and I know that Maggie doesn't, but when we first came out with what we call the GSEs in Rhode Island, that I know that I think you were GEs in Vermont, people were taking those standards and putting them up on the board So when somebody comes in, so what are you learning? They read, well, we are learning how to, they just read the standard. There's no value to that. I will say this, in your classrooms, don't be afraid to put the cross-cutting concepts up there. Refer to them, point to them. And the practices too. That's okay. They can see that. Because when you look at these prompts and you ask students these prompts, I think you would agree with me that there would be a very good likelihood that students would attend to the aspect of the implosion that you want them to focus on. And the one thing that I should put in is that you can have what they call couplets. And the Crosscutting Concept book talks about couplets. What I mean by couplet is, for instance, if you're looking at an echinacea flower, a purple cone flower, and you see the symmetry in the cone stem, you might say, what could have caused that pattern? Two cross-cutting concepts amplifying each other. That's a couplet. Or draw a model of the energy transferring into and out of the system. Another couplet. So it doesn't mean that every prompt has to just be one cross-cutting concept. I'm doing this just for an opportunity to just exemplify. But again, thinking about the student, do you give the students the best opportunity to focus in on the aspect of the phenomena that you want them to during your lesson or your investigation? Which therefore now, if you do that, not only brings in the individual student into the aspect, but now you have the whole class focusing in on it and working in groups. You have a better opportunity for different explanations, but much closer to each other, so that now you can get into the practices where they can share their explanations, argue from evidence, come to a consensus, because you're looking at the same thing. Make sense? So this is what I was talking about, that, you know, if you go into the classroom tomorrow and you could be doing a traditional lesson, you can still think about, well, what question could I ask to really help them along? Because you know where you want them to end up. Just think about what it is in your lesson that where the pathway is, and what cross-cutting concept might best help the student to be able to get there. This is the power of these cross-cutting concepts. And the thing about this, though, it's not easy. It takes practice. You have to be able to use them all the time. They're progression. In other words, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way up to senior in high school. The ideal situation would be that when they come into kindergarten, the kindergarten teacher is talking about cross-cutting concept in the scope of their pedagogy. The first grade teacher is taking that and building that using the same language, but as the student goes through the K-12 cycle, their sophistication and understanding of using these cross-cutting concepts develops. And so a 8th grader is going to have a different explanation using a cross-cutting concept than a 2nd grader, which makes sense, right? But the language is the same. It doesn't change when you get to senior year. You're still using those 7 cross-cutting concepts, but they build upon each other. And what comes into this is, if you really think about some of the important takeaways here, they become a common language. But they only become a common language is if you, as a teacher, use them in your everyday classroom language, whether that's a question or a prompt or an expectation in your students' explanations. If it becomes a common language, then the students take that language and they use that in their explanation. I'll share a story about that in a minute. So this is kind of what I was talking about. So if a student is exposed to a phenomenon like baking soda and vinegar, and you're asking them to write an explanation, this is the nirvana. This is where you want them to be able to go. So what's the explanation? matter is concerned. They talk about the system. They talk about how the energy or the matter is going into and out of the system, or conservation of energy is conserved. It becomes the language of the student, not just in the written word, but in the oral discourse that's coming out of that. If you're having students write an explanation, or Erica, this might be a great opportunity for like an exit quiz or something like that. You might want to work or what have you. If it's a written explanation, don't just settle with they identified the right cross-cutting concept. Ask for evidence. Make sure evidence comes into that conversation. It's very easy to identify what it is, but what's the evidence that it's being used properly? And these 2 points I kind of touched upon. That first point I just talked about if you're using them, they become the focus on specific aspects. The last point is they only become powerful when they are familiar touchstones. There should be no such thing as cross-cutting concepts Tuesdays. It's not like tacos, okay? They use them every single day, every single class period. And so, and not just for one class, for all classes. It's common language. If somebody starts making fun of you and saying, oh, she's all about the cross-cutting concepts, great, you've done your job. And hopefully other colleagues will be getting that same moniker, because you can't be the exception and having everybody else not do it. It means the whole faculty, everybody has to do that. The story I want to share is I was doing some work in a district in Connecticut. And so 6 months earlier, I was doing some professional development on this cross-cutting concepts and really reinforcing that they have to become a common language. And I was invited to visit doing a walkthrough of the school. And during that walkthrough, a representative of the Department of Ed from Connecticut was there. And we were in a 5th grade classroom. And they had a whiteboard, touchboard up there, and they're showing on the Eastern Seaboard, they're showing different patterns for tides at a certain time, when tides were coming in or not. And the teacher was doing some great job in prompting the students. And one student stood up and gave an explanation and said, one of the things I've observed is that the patterns of the different tides go in a very certain order as you go down the Eastern Seaboard. So it has to be the longitude, the latitude that has to be affecting that. I mean, I almost started crying. I looked at the teacher. He was busting out in the biggest grin because it was a genuine, authentic response from the student. They used the cross-cutting concepts in their explanation. That's when you know you've got it. That's when you know that you're doing a great job in using these cross-cutting concepts. You can get, I believe you can access this from the PowerPoint, but I strongly advise you to take this, download it. It's, I don't know, maybe 56, 60 pages. But much of what I shared with you came out of this, what I call a primer. It's using cross-cutting concepts as prompt student responses. And it really goes into a lot of different aspects, like, how to use it for formative assessment and how to use it in a written form. So this is a great resource that can easily be shared. By the way, the SCAS that this is done with an organization called SCAS through Council of Chief State School Officers. SCAS stands for, let me see if I can remember this, State Collaboration for Assessment of Student Standards, SCAS. This is a science SCAS that comes in. This is a great product used that the member organization, member states and product did a fantastic job putting this together. And so what I'm going to leave you with before we get into our questions, if we have anything, and Maggie, I think you know Sean Elkins, but a very good colleague of mine, one of the funniest guys I ever met in my life. He came up with, I call it the Elkins principle. It's actually a proportionality. And I remember when I was teaching, and they were bringing out the new Rhode Island GSEs. And I was saying, yeah, I do that. I do that. I do that. I do that. Check, 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 check. But when you really think about it, you don't really do. You don't, it's not touching upon it. It's not, you really don't go deep into it. So he came up with a proportionality. This proportionality, those that already do that is inversely proportionate to those who say that we already do that. And so that's so true, because the real true actors and believers in it are in the minority. A lot more people say they already do it, but they don't. And so what I advise you to do is really go slow. As I said, don't wait until you have to get this big elaborate 3D lesson together. Try it out. Try it. If this was a Friday, be perfect. I usually use the term, try it on Monday. Well, try it on Thursday. Try it on Friday. But try to infuse in a couple of those prompts when you're trying to think about what you're going to ask the students. You know, and I know I'm going like this because a lot of times when when I was teaching on the fly, I would think, okay, I need to ask them something to get them back on track. When you do that, think about, can I infuse in a cross-cutting concept? And one of the things I do want to share with you, this is a professional development. This is a short, very small professional development, but it only becomes professional learning when you use it in the classroom. So that's a big difference between professional development and professional learning. You are in a professional development where you are being exposed to new ways of improving your teaching practice. But it only becomes professional learning when you bring it into the classroom. You can see how the students are reacting to it. You can react to it in your change of your instruction. You can see how it is being received by your students. In other words, you become cognitive scientists. You're actually operating on something that's research-based. So I promised you we're going to be doing this. This is not going to go the full 6 o'clock. But I have to tell you, even though we were short, your participation and the way you picked up on this was fantastic. We didn't leave anything off the table. We really covered everything. But I want to make sure that you don't have any questions that I haven't had a chance to address. So this is your time. Do you have any questions or anything that is still confusing to you? Anything I can help you with? Did this make sense to you?
Oh, yes. It was great.
I'm glad to hear that, Jessica.
Mhm.
Thank you. And I hope it changed the paradigm you had with cross-cutting concepts. The thing I want you to really take away with this is that cross-cutting concepts are not passive. Seems to be a misunderstanding out there that maybe a cross-cutting concept will show up on a quiz or a test so that they can, check off to see, well, they know what a pattern is, the a cause and effect is. But I wanted you to see that they are not passive, they are dynamic, they use often, and they really do affect how the students learn and how they focus in. Although it is not like, it may not be as evident as like, for instance, when they're using the practices, they're actually making the thinking visible. You can see them planning an investigation. You can observe their model. You can see how they're defining a system, and they make the thinking visible. Using a cross-cutting concept, it may not have that same transparency, but at the same token, you as a teacher understanding where you want them to go with that cross-cutting concept, you can get evaluation evidence of whether they're on track or not. So I just wish I was able to be up there face to face with you all and be able to do this a little bit more dynamically and have a little bit more fun. I guess we can do this. I find, Zoom is so sterile. You don't really get a chance to really get to know people. But what I do want you to do is there's my email address, McLaren Peter J. If you're ever trying to figure out how to spell my name, there's a McLaren racing flag right behind me. So not that I have any relation or the money related to McLaren racing, I spell the name the same way. So if you can remember how to spell it with one C, just put a Peter J after it and send it off to Gmail if I can be of any help to you at all, whether it's this or anything else you want to talk about. Or if you really want to make my day, give me a call or text me. But the best part of my day is if I can really help support teachers in reaching out to the students, because I'm more in the classroom every day. I miss the classroom so much. When I left to go to the Department of Ed, I think I tricked myself saying, oh, I'll still be able to connect with kids. No, when you're in the Department of Ed, you don't connect with kids, you connect with teachers. This way, working with teachers, it's the best thing. It's like, I feel like I'm back in the classroom again, because I feel if I can help you, I help kids again. And so I just want to thank you for, number one, the professionals that you are, what you do every single day for the students of Vermont, and more importantly, please, please, please let me have an opportunity to come back and do something else with you. If you find this meaningful, just give a whisper to Margaret and see how we can do this again. But this has been a great, great piece of the afternoon for me. So
Thank you, Peter.
thank you all.
Yes, thank you.
All right, you all have the PowerPoint. Don't be afraid. You got my email. You got everything you need. All right.
Perfect.
So now I'm going to let you get on with your afternoon.
Feels like evening now.
Yeah, I have to go to dinner.